I think it's important once you figure out what you want your pricing strategy to be, figure out how to make it easy for your team to execute it.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the extremely tight relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and today our guest is Stacy Sifleet. Here are 3 things you want to know about Stacy before we start. She has worked at some companies that I am extremely curious about, including Sears and True Value. She has both an undergrad and master's degree in math, which means we're geeking out today. Sorry. She just launched her own pricing consulting firm, and I can't wait to hear what she's planning for that as well. Welcome, Stacy.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be fun. How did you get into pricing?
So I actually started my career working on the procurement side and consulting and learned all about procurement and identifying ways to help companies cut their costs. And kind of from that, it's the opposite side of the table of pricing. So when you're sitting on the side, kind of driving down costs, driving down pricing, the other side is the sales team trying to win pricing. So kind of ended up flipping after about 7 years working in procurement. It's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, anybody who's listened to my previous podcasts, or many of them, know that I despise procurement people, and I have very few good things to say about them. So let's not go down that path today.
Okay.
I'll give you a hard question. What's your biggest mistake in pricing? If you think back through your career and you're like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that one.
Biggest mistake in pricing. That's a good one. I'd say throwing out a number before somebody else throws out a number. I think if you ever throw out a number before you really understand the value to the customer, that's the biggest mistake. And so I probably did that in one of my first pricing roles, and you lose a ton of value there.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a sales role, right? If you're doing that in the world of pricing, it means it touches multiple salespeople too. So that's really big. Mm-hmm. Ouch.
Yeah.
How did you get to where you are today? I'm totally fascinated by the retail aspects, and we talked for just a few seconds, and we're not going to slam any companies as we go through this. Is that fair? And we're not trying to pick on any companies, but what we want to do is I just want to learn how companies think about pricing, especially in this retail space where I know so little because I've never worked in that space, and I'm fascinated.
So I think my career kind of in getting to where I'm at today, where I'm really trying to focus on pricing and value and delivering that benefit to businesses, it's taken an interesting path. So as I mentioned, I started truly consulting on the operations procurement side, and then kind of slowly made my way to kind of more specifically pricing. So the first big step away was Sears, and that wasn't really a specific pricing role. I helped build an internal consulting team in the Shop Your Way program. And Shop Your Way is a loyalty program where they have just masses of data on all sorts of customers. And we wanted to use that data to figure out how to benefit the business. And like I said, it wasn't really pricing focused, but could we make sure we had the right products in the right locations for the customers in those locations? And Sears is a big company. I think they'd be really smart, and they have some really, really smart data scientists to use all that data. But what I found being there is you had some people who had been there 20, 30 years who just had no interest in changing. And then other people who were really fresh and excited to use this information. But it was such a complex, layered organization. It took so much to actually get things done. So I've seen that in a lot of really big organizations that it's, they kind of step on their own toes and struggle to execute.
It is so hard for big companies to change. There is no doubt. It is really challenging. One of the things, for a couple thoughts on what you just said. First off, I think of pricing as a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're talking about where do I put the product? Okay, maybe that's a logistics, maybe that's a merchandising, but it's also I want to make sure that people perceive the value of my product properly. Yep. And so I think of pricing not only as I got to put a price on the product at the very end, but I have to communicate the price, I have to communicate the value, I have to create products, or I guess in retail space, I have to choose products that have value.
Yeah,
And so I find all of that part of pricing.
Yeah, one of the really interesting projects I did at Sears was hyper localization of marketing. Basically, they didn't have any marketing funds, so we had to figure out. I was working with a lawn and garden organization, figuring out kind of where do we market and tell people we've got your lawnmowers, we've got your patio sets. So it was kind of pricing was a piece of it because we used the indicators of when is grass growing, when's the weather going to be nice, so we could trigger at the right time for the right markets, but we also couldn't trigger at every single market. So we had to figure out where, when we did spend the money, we'd be able to get people in. So that was really interesting. It was using data to say, okay, which markets make sense, what's the right time, and then where are we going to get our biggest bang for the buck on that marketing spend. So that was interesting, and that team actually was able to execute. It was exciting.
Yeah, that kind of says it's not nationwide. It's we're going to do little regions or even stores.
Yeah, exactly.
To that matter.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think that's fascinating. You've said the word data a bunch of times, and I want to differentiate I want to hear your opinion for a second about B2B versus B2C for a second. I tend to live in the world of B2B, and I think about individual buyers and how they make decisions. And if I were in the B2C world, I would be thinking way more about data and how to use it.
Yeah.
So when you use data, how much are you thinking about the buyers and the decisions that they make?
So I've worked in B2B, I've worked in B2C, and I've worked in B2C. I've worked kind of across the board. And I think, sometimes you have to, when you're thinking about a huge national account in B2B, you have to think about the individual decision maker. But even in B2B, where you've got a lot of customers, you have to figure out how to group your customers and figure out how these types of customers are similar and how they think as a group. And sometimes there's, subgroups within those groups, and it can be extremely complicated. But if you can think about consistencies and grouping data, then you can really see trends and use statistics and run all sorts of very interesting tests, which is fun if you want to geek out on math a little bit.
Yep. But so pause for just a second, and then we're going to come back. I agree 100%. I think of that as market segmentation. And just to be clear about what I was describing is if I'm a salesperson selling to an account, now I'm dealing one account at a time. How much value does that account have? Okay, back to you.
Yeah. So, okay, say that one more time. We're thinking about one account at a time, and how do we use data for that one account?
No. I don't want you to address that. I just wanted to clarify for the listeners that when I think of B2B, I'm often thinking about how is a salesperson discovering and communicating value for an individual client or an individual prospect. But when we talk about data, it is absolutely market segmentation, or it is absolutely big markets, and we're combining people together. And we want to do that in B2B as well as B2C. Yeah. Absolutely. Those are all true statements. Completely with you. B2C feels like it's way more data driven than B2B.
Well, that might be how it is. It's not how it should be, I think. So when I think about B2B, I think our sales teams, even if they're working with one specific account, they really should be diving into the data across their accounts and say, how are these customers different? Which of these customers add more value to the business? Which of these customers can we get to add more value to the business? But you can't do that just from a conversation. You have to look at the numbers. You have to look at the data. So I think one of the things that's led me to really open up my company and focusing on pricing is I think a lot of the small and medium businesses aren't tapping into that data, and they're kind of just doing what they've always done, which is relationship building and kind of driving pricing that way, when really if we leverage the data, we can still maintain those relationships, but we can be a lot smarter and capture a lot more of the value.
Cool. Let's talk about some specific retail stuff for a second, just because I don't know the answers.
Okay.
There's a thing called category management. One of my best friends is a category manager, and I have no idea what he does. category management play a role in pricing?
So I think category management, merchant, kind of overlapping types of roles. And I think it varies depending on the company. When I was at True Value, when I joined, pricing kind of previously, I think before I joined, there had been 3 or 4 pricing leaders in 3 or 4 years, and pricing lived with the merchants and then maybe lived with finance. And then ultimately when I was there, it was under operations. And I think it's interesting, and kind of you can be creative on where pricing should live, but I don't think it should necessarily live with the merchants. You need some kind of outside perspective that comes in. So category managers or merchants, I think their role needs to be, do we have the right products? Do we have good relationship with our vendors? Are we marketing it correctly? But not necessarily what's the right price, and kind of how do we figure that out for each market.
Okay. So I would have thought the answer was different than that. And that's okay, because I don't know the answers. Yeah. How do you get people into the store?
So I didn't do a ton of work on kind of promotions and marketing, but True Value, I'll kind of step away from Sears a little bit and go into True Value. And True Value is an interesting company. When I was there, it was a pure co-op, so that the retailers owned their own stores. And really, at corporate, we had 4,000 store owners that were essentially our bosses. So they could kind of operate how they wanted. We had programs at corporate that they could leverage, but you have flyers, so you do marketing to get the word out. They did email marketing, different ways to get out there. But True Value was really interesting because a lot of the times we couldn't compete on price. So price wasn't necessarily how we were trying to get people in. It was more kind of the support and getting that kind of really neighborhoody feel and getting help with your project versus the big contractor going to the Lowe's or Home Depot for the best price.
So it's much more of a service or a value add than a price thing.
Yes.
And I guess the reason I asked the question is we often hear of milk at the back of the grocery store. And so we're going to advertise milk at a really low price because I want you to come to my grocery store and I know I'm going to sell you a whole bunch more stuff.
Yes.
And back when I was a doctoral student, I read papers where these are the 20 products that people actually remember the price of. And so they know if you're giving them a low price or not.
Yep.
And I find all these just so fascinating about how do we as pricing people use this information as we start setting prices for so many different products in a retail setting.
Yeah, so at True Value, we basically would label a product or a line of products, blind, visible, highly visible, kind of along that line. Is this an item where we have to be super sharp because they know what it's going to cost? It becomes really, really challenging in a hardware business where you've got 60,000 items in a store, and a mom coming in to maybe get something to fix something, but also a hardcore contractor coming in to fill something that they both have very different understanding of what prices should be. The mom might know batteries cost X, but the contractor knows this drill should be Y. So your visibility varies by customer. So it becomes really challenging. And then you're also competing with just humongous companies that have such better buying power that even if, cement should cost $1.99 a bag, and that's what Home Depot sells it for, True Value cannot meet that price. So kind of figuring that out and figuring out where you want to match the competitor and where you're just going to say, nope, this is a convenience item and we're going to charge more, and we're going to have to lose some of that business because of it.
How's the podcast going? Are you getting value? Research shows that people don't really value what they get for free. But I'm hoping you'll prove this research wrong. Please demonstrate to us and the entire world that you value this podcast. Would you please pause the podcast, subscribe if you haven't already done so, rate the podcast, and leave us a short review? You'd be doing a huge favor. And research shows if you invest this little bit of time, you'll probably like the podcast even more. Win-win. Pause. Do it now. We'll wait for you. Yeah. And so I want to jump back to category management then for just a second and ask the same type of question. And that is, I have somebody coming in and they're going to buy I have no idea. Let's pick, they're going to buy a shovel,
Mhm.
right? And I could have 2 or 3 different types of shovels or qualities of shovels.
Yep.
And I want to set prices because I'm trying to influence which shovel they buy and
Yep.
how I maximize the revenue and the margin to the company based on the decision the buyer's going to make.
Yes. It's very interesting.
And isn't that category management or is that pricing?
So the two have to work together really well. I mean, you have to make sure as a category manager, you have to make sure, you've got, the appropriate kind of assortment. You've got maybe the good, better, best private label that is good, but you can get it at a price that allows you to have it kind of be at a really lower step in price point. And then kind of figuring out what assortment you want so you're not kind of overwhelming the customer, but you have maybe 2 or 3 options that make sense, provide various characteristics that maybe lead to having different prices. But then you have to work with the vendors and the pricing team to figure out kind of that price step up strategy. So while it's not category management kind of leading the price strategy, they do have to do a lot of the day-to-day work. But I think you need that overarching pricing team to develop the strategy and make sure it's being implemented.
And I'm not going to ask about True Value or Sears, but your experience at retail, do they tend to use a simple cost plus algorithm, or are they actually thinking almost on a product by product basis, or maybe it's a category by category basis? This is the margin that we think we could get away with from this product.
My experience has been all over the board. It depends on the category manager, but I don't think I've never seen it be a pure cost plus at retail. I think a lot of it is driven by kind of an understanding of the market, an understanding of where the competitors are, and an understanding of kind of how much or how little can we get on this category. So I think it's kind of triangulating some of those factors to get to the right price.
Yeah, I just find this so fascinating. If you, out of curiosity, can you share with us how many SKUs is in an average Sears store?
I have no idea, honestly. I don't know. I would guess in the 100. I don't know. From True Value, I know it's probably 30,000. So I would guess Sears is significantly more than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so managing 30,000 prices has got to not be easy.
No, it's not easy. No.
Okay. So tell me what your new pricing by the way, congratulations. You launched your new company 3 months ago now. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess it was, June. Yep. A few months.
So you escaped the corporate world and said, I'm going to go help more companies with what I know. And what are you going to do? How are you going to offer this? What types of solutions are you going to offer?
So my experience has been, especially with the small and medium-sized businesses, that they just don't have the capacity and the time to really put a lot of strategy behind pricing. So my goal is I want to help small and medium-sized businesses increase profits by implementing really targeted price strategy and kind of growing from just reacting to quotes and getting a price out there to kind of developing a process where they can capture that additional value where they can. So I think there's many different ways to do it, but I see kind of the first step is really understanding their customers, understanding their products, and understanding some of the hidden costs in their products and customers, and kind of figuring out how can they recapture that cost.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And is this going to be mostly data driven, or is it going to be I use data as I need it?
So I don't think you can make a lot of these decisions without data. I think there's going to be a lot of data to understand where you are and understand where you can go. But then there's also going to be just the inherent knowledge from the people in the business that's layered on top of it. So I think it's really kind of always using data, but always kind of using your brain and thinking kind of realistically as well. Because you can't just say, oh, this costs us more, we got to charge more. There's a lot of pieces that go to it.
Yeah. So the thing I find fascinating about data is interesting, data is useful. The only way it's really useful is if someone creates a model and says, let's go test it. Is this really what's happening in the market? Are people really buying more on Sundays or whatever the heck it is, right? There's some experiment or hypothesis we have to run to go do that data.
My last role, I worked one of the companies I was working with was an e-commerce company where we were kind of running into the Amazon kind of effect, where Amazon was kind of slowly taking over market share, and it was really hard to compete with Amazon pricing. And we did some of that testing. We said, can we, if we match Amazon or if we beat Amazon, can we gain share? And I think Amazon is a whole other topic, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But I think kind of doing some of those testing with different control groups and trying a few things out and giving it time does 100% help you see the results and kind of prove one way or the other. And I think it also gives kind of these businesses confidence that the changes they're making are working and they're capturing value.
Yeah, absolutely. This has just been absolutely fascinating, Stacy. I've enjoyed this a lot. Okay, before we go, we always have the ending question, but first, give me a couple data tools, statistical tools you like to use as you're doing your pricing work. A couple of your favorites.
So honestly, I use typically very basic tools because I think when I'm working with companies that are super early on in their pricing journey, using even just Excel, SQL, Tableau, kind of to understand the data is often the easiest way to go about kind of getting quick change. And then you can get into kind of more advanced statistical tools with R or SAS. But often, just the incremental changes drive a lot of value, and sometimes not more is needed for the smaller companies.
Yeah, I guess instead of tool, I should have said the word technique. What statistical techniques are we going to use? Or just a couple of your favorite. I mean, there's so many out there. I was just curious what you like. And,
I mean, I like A/B testing. I like linear regression. I like kind of segmenting products, segmenting customers. So those are the type of techniques I use.
Yeah, when you're in Excel, pivot tables are magic.
Oh yeah, pivot charts. I love a pivot chart. It can blow your mind so quickly. You can turn just zeros and ones into a picture that can tell you something.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating. Fascinating. Okay. I end every podcast with the following question. Here it is. What's one piece of pricing advice that you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
So I think it's important, once you figure out what you want your pricing strategy to be, figure out how to make it easy for your team to execute it. And I think often we kind of create a strategy and figure out what we want to do. But if it's complicated and, hard to implement, you're not going to gain the success. So kind of what can you do and how do you make it easy to implement?
Yeah, that internal implementation is often hard, and often companies or people just take it as a constraint and say, I'm not going to do anything because I can't do anything.
Yes.
So nice. All right. Stacy, thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
You can reach me at pricingvelocity.com or Stacy at pricingvelocity.com, and that's STACY.
Perfect. All right. Episode 32 in the can. My favorite part, oh my gosh, all of it. I love learning about retail, or I love learning about anything I don't really know about. So that was really fun. What was your favorite part? Please let us know in the comments or wherever you downloaded and listened. While you're at it, please give us a 5-star review. We would hugely appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast or about pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.